Welcome to ViviTalks. I'm Vivian Arts. Join me in celebrating 100 talented female musicians from my last album, Type of Thing. Empowering female cacao farmers in Congo's Virunga State Park and restoring the rainforest. Delve into the musical journeys, creative processes, and unique perspectives of these talented women that were involved in the making of this album. Today I'm talking with Nadje Noordhuis, Australian trumpet player and composer and educator living in New York City, described as one of the most compelling voices to emerge on her instrument in recent years. Australian-born, New York-based trumpeter-composer Nadje Noordhuis possesses one of the most unforgettably lyrical voices in modern music. Her deeply felt clarion tone and evocative compositional gift melds classical rigor, jazz expression, and world music accent into a sound that is distinctively her own. Noordhuis was one of the 10 semi-finalists in the 2007 Thelonious Monk International Jazz Trumpet Competition and was selected as a Carnegie Hall Young Artist in 2010. Based in New York since 2003, she is a member of the multiple Grammy-winning Maria Schneider Orchestra, Grammy-nominated Darcy James Argue's Secret Society, and the Grammy-nominated Anat Cohen Tentet. Listen to our conversation as we explore the many facets of Nadje and her endeavours, from writing music for herself and others to playing her own work and in the many famous big bands. So, welcome Nadje to my official podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you in there, and it's been a joy to know you. And I'd love to present you to whoever's listening, and so that everybody can learn a little bit more about you and what you do. And so let's just dive into it. Where you're from, what do you do, what brought you to where you are now?
Okay. I'm from Sydney, Australia. I lived in a few places when I lived in Australia. I studied in Melbourne, for example, but I moved to New York 20 years ago. So I've been here quite some time. And what do I do? That's a good question. I often wonder this myself. I'm a trumpet player. That much I know. I write music. I write music for other people and for myself, and I teach a lot. I love teaching, and yeah, I play, I guess, mainly in big bands, but I also do a lot of recordings for different projects across all genres. So, I also play in like a new music ensemble, like a 5-trumpet quintet and some great big bands, and yeah, just whatever, whenever is the, as the freelance life goes. So I guess that's what I do.
And you have your own projects too, right?
Yeah. It's like they're often sort of pushed to the side and just sort of, they're hard to prioritize, to be honest, with just everything else that's going on. But I have a duo with James Shipp, who's a really great vibraphone player and synthesist and percussionist. And I've got a quintet that has like a couple of different lineups. That's sort of like two bands that occasionally will do some gigs around New York, or release an album or something.
Cool, great. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your writing, because I love your music, and can you maybe describe a bit about your creative process? How do you approach writing or composing music?
It's different with every project. For example, right now I'm writing for a brass band, and so there's that process is a little bit different, because I've written for sort of small brass bands but never sort of like the full size before, so there's definitely like a learning component to it. So it's all about like trying to get some resources together. So I have some idea of what I'm doing before I start, and it's a matter of just listening also. and then also just honestly, a lot of my process, it might look like I'm not doing anything, but I'm just sort of sitting and thinking and imagining, and then trying to jot down those ideas, and then I'll sort of flesh them out on piano, and then try to orchestrate them as best I can. So that's sort of the process with all groups. Yeah, I mainly sort of write at the piano. I don't write on the trumpet. But yeah, I don't know. It's just sort of like a lot of imagining what it could be, or sort of just trying to hear it in your head and then quickly trying to grab it and write it down. So
does that start with a melody or a rhythmic pattern, or do you walk around in the city and just have this eureka? Or
I haven't had too many of those lately. Like, I think I've got some voice memos of some ideas, but I don't think I've probably used too many of those. Usually it's like a concentrated time that I put aside to be like, okay, I'm gonna go write for an hour. So I think the consistency of it makes it easier for ideas to turn up, and I feel like those are, I guess, better ideas in a way. Right. Yeah. But that's hard to do. Like, obviously everybody's so busy, and it's hard to have the consistency of practice. But when it does happen, I feel like the end result is better.
That's great. And then so most of the time when you compose or you write, you have a certain type of band or ensemble in mind already?
It depends. I mean, if I'm writing for writing's sake, it's usually, I feel like, just because I'm essentially just improvising at the piano, then they're piano tunes, and then I'm like, well, what would sound good, with a trumpet or a flugelhorn or something. And then, for a while I was really good about I had this dedicated practice space, and I would go there 3 times a week and just write for 2 hours. And so I'd have all these sketchbooks of ideas, and so I would just write for no particular reason. I didn't have any commissions or anything, so I would just sort of write, and then later on, when either I had a project of making a record or writing for people, I would go through my sketchbooks and see if there's anything there that I can use. So I feel like I'm just sort of like stockpiling little ideas that maybe they'll come in handy later on, or maybe they never will. A lot of them I'm like, oh, I thought this was good, but it's terrible. But then no one ever hears that, so it's okay. And it's okay, to think things aren't great. I don't take it personally,
right?
Just like, oh, it is what it is, or it isn't what it isn't. So yeah, so that's sort of how I've approached it.
Yeah, that's great. So it's more about the process, and it may be even like a muscle, just doing it and making sure that you stay with it, and then whenever there's a project that you can use it for, and you maybe arrange it for bigger or smaller groups, or the purpose of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, nice. I think it just, because often things will come up last minute, and it's really hard to come up with an idea like quickly. So if I've already come up with some other ideas in previously, then that just sort of cuts a lot of time. So I'm into that. Try to be as efficient as possible. Like, how fast can I write this?
Very nice. So tell me a little bit about, you're performing a lot, different places all over the world. Can you share a significant moment, or what do you really love about performing?
I mean, I think one of the groups that I I play with that is always very satisfying is the Maria Schneider Orchestra. So being a part of a trumpet section within the entire ensemble is just something that I really love. I love being a part of something bigger, and it's, you know, it's not about me. It's not the Nadje show, you know. It's like, you know, I get to blend, and I get to sort of to support and sort of be a bridge between sections, and I love that sort of sense of unity, like all the cutoffs are together, you know, the intonation is spot on, like, and that sort of precision, and just that, you know, the section is of such a high level. It's just like really, it's just such a joy to play. And it's always those moments when, you know, when I get to do a gig and I can think back, like I'm like, I never, like I had it on my list of things that I wanted to achieve, you know, or goals, you know, whatever it was, you know, for like 15 years I wanted to play with this group. And so it's just like, oh, I just had, if I think back, I'm like, you know, I never would have thought, I hoped that it would happen, but it's just nice to sort of almost think like, you know, of whispering in the ear of your former self, like you're gonna get a chair in this band, you know. So keep doing it. It's gonna work out, you know. So it's nice to think about the times that it does actually work out. as opposed to all the other times that it doesn't.
Well, how did you get the gig then? How did you run in this situation?
Right. So I know that, I mean, I know that Laurie had recommended me for the gig, you know, just as someone to like sub for rehearsals and stuff. I'm playing her book, Third Trumpet, and so it was 2015, and I was actually at a Trumpet Guild conference, the International Trumpet Guild conference in Columbus, Ohio. And I'd been to a lecture, and then I got out, and there was a voicemail, and I was on an escalator. It was one of these sort of two-part escalators where there's like a little platform, and I was on the first one, and I get this message like, "Hi, this is Maria Schneider." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." And so I didn't make it up to the next floor for like another 20 minutes. Like I just like called her mid escalator. Like it was basically like, yes, whatever you want, you know.
I mean,
yeah. So I think she just asked me to play a rehearsal. I think it's that part is sort of hazy. Yeah, I believe so. That's right. And then I and then I got to rehearsal, and it was the lead book. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm a little underprepared, but I made it through. And then I started subbing in the band for a year, and then after a year she officially asked me. So I think she started to ask me, and I just cut her off and said yes. So she didn't even get through it, you know, asking officially before I agreed. So yeah, so that was, you know, 2015, 16. So it's been a while.
Beautiful. And you were describing these magic moments. Is there a secret behind that magic? What makes a good, like,
what makes like a magic moment in music, or in my career, or just in life?
Well, that's deep.
That is deep. I'm like, how deep are we going?
Like the music first.
The music.
What creates that magic that
what just creates like, it?
Right, I mean, together.
I think, to me, if it's with an ensemble, it's all about the times where everything is just operating on a really high level. That to me is what it is. And by that I mean, that all business has been taken care of, you know, like the sound is good, you know, the music is good, and the approach to playing the music is good. You know, I just feel like if all those things are happening together, and also if you're surrounded by great people, that's such an important part of it too, then I think that's a pretty winning combination. Yeah, I think that's I think you need those ingredients.
Yeah. So she's making an amazing selection. I mean, she obviously she gets the best players in her band, and she's been touring with this music for so many years, right? So yeah, that's
yeah, and it's the attention to detail that she's spent. I mean, I've only recorded on that last album, which is the double album, Data Lords, and you know, we spent 5 days in the studio, and I've recorded hundreds of times, but that was just particularly, it really stood out because of her attention to detail. I just never actually seen it on that level before. It was really, really eye-opening. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because I mean, originally, I mean, I love studios. I was going to be an engineer. Like that was like, you know, my original plan. So it was just really fantastic to see someone operate on that. To me, it was like a whole class of its own. I'd never seen that before. So that was cool. Raised the bar a little bit.
very nice. I'd love to hear about maybe a significant moment when your music had an impact on somebody or somebody's life, or.
Well, that's funny. I have this album called 10 Sales with Luke Howard that came out 7 or 8 years ago. And, you know, we made it because we're great friends and we'd never done a project together. And he was living in Europe at the time, and I was coming over to Europe to do some gigs with another band. And so I just flew to Berlin, and we just spent a week sort of rehearsing this music that we'd all sort of put into a Dropbox, and made this record in a couple of days, and put it out into the world with no publicity, or we did nothing. We didn't do any gigs. And it just seemed to have, it has this little life of its own. So it's become like, you know, I often think of it as like a child or something, like you sort of sent this child off into the world, and it's had its own life. So I've had like over the years, lots of messages of, you know, people that will have written poetry to it, or, you know, done animations, or just sort of reached out and just saying, I just really love the album. Or like, you know, this song in particular, like it really moves me, or whatever, you know. And so that's just really nice that people go to that effort of contacting me, you know, or Luke, you know, we will just forward it, you know, to each other if we get a nice message. So yeah, I mean, I think it was great. We did one gig, just like a private little gig in New York, you know. And I remember someone came down from Canada to and I'm like, really? Like to
see the gig.
To see the gig.
Wow.
Like they traveled for like 12 hours to go to the gig, and I'm like, wow, that's cool. And then was it 2 years ago in 2021, and I was back in Sydney for a little bit, and I'd gone to Melbourne, and Luke was like, we should do a gig. And so we were going to play like the salon of like this beautiful, it's like the Melbourne Concert Hall or the recital hall, but there's like this little salon, you know. I'm like, oh, that'd be perfect, like just like this intimate little room,
right?
You know. And so we advertised it, and within a couple of days they're like, you've sold out, how about you play the main?
They had to upgrade you from more seats.
It was like 1,500 seats, so that was like really interesting, because I didn't sort of ever think of our CD release gig 7 years after the fact, would be in such a beautiful space, with such a lovely audience. So so that's something that pops to mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So those moments make you realize your music matters, right? You're doing it for a higher purpose or whatever that is, without even doing it.
Yeah, I mean, usually when I play, I have this, it sounds awful and it's going to make me sound like a terrible person, but I mean it in a really good way, is that I feel like if someone comes up to me at the end and said that I made them cry, then I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah.
Like, it's my goal to connect. That's all. That's what it's about. It's, it's like connecting with people's emotions and feelings. And so if someone sort of says that they've been moved or has then I'm like great, thanks. Like, check. So that's sort of how I like to approach things, and that way I'm never like sort of phoning it in, right. Or just like turning up to a gig and be like, oh, I want to go watch TV or whatever, like,
right, you're never bored. It's, you keep it real.
It's like, I'm just trying. I'm like, I need to play this in such a way that hopefully people will feel what I'm feeling, and then that will translate, and that will make a difference to them, whether or not they feel, cleansed or just better or just feeling good or happy or whatever it is, just some sort of change or, some sort of connection. That's it.
Do you have a way to do that? Or, I mean, do you, it's hard to do that consciously, right? Or,
I mean,
can you actively?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but like, for example, like in a, if I'm playing a ballad, for example, like I'm consciously trying to play as sort of emotively as possible, and sometimes that means me thinking of a certain situation or place or person or whatever, and then sort of almost like internally quite aggressively pursuing that, and trying to make my sound like, trying to sort of craft the sound in a way that is going to evoke like a certain reaction. Like, I could play, to me it's like a level up from sort of like just playing as like prettily as I can, but then there's a way of like shaping that with dynamics and articulation and even like including sort of like the non-pretty things in it, or and for me there's a lot of emotional connection possibilities in the ends of notes. So every note that I'm playing, I'm crafting the end of every note, because if you hold a note, you could hold, there's so many different possibilities. You can hold the note sort of straight, you can hold it and then have a little bit of vibrato, and you can have, or you could crescendo, you could decrescendo, you could do all these things. And to me, if I pay extra special attention to the ends of notes, that's what tends to get people. It's really interesting.
Gives a direction.
Yeah, it's just there's something about it. It's like a little
nudge,
stab stab in the guts. Yeah, like obviously it's it's not going to happen all the time, but it's worth giving
it a go. Do you get emotional by your own playing sometimes?
I mean, I'm thinking of emotions, but it's like I can have two things going at once. I can be feeling all these emotions very deeply, and you would just never know by looking at me. So it
doesn't influence you, I'm sure.
No. No. Usually, I mean, I've cried a few times playing, but that's usually just due to the environment. Like, for example, I do, like every year since I was probably well, not every year, but a lot of the years, since I was very young, I do like this sort of, it's like a ceremonial trumpet, it was originally a bugle, playing for like the Australian, it's like our war memorial, it's our Anzac Day, so they have this service, which is very moving. And then at the end, then the trumpet or the bugle, but the trumpet sounds, and that's the point that people really start to lose it. And so it's hard because I'm facing everybody and I'm seeing everybody, and I'm the type of person that if I see someone cry, I will just start crying. So it's like now I've got to like look above their heads, or just try and think of something. It's like I'm trying to play it, even though it's it's only like four notes or whatever, but I'm trying to play it in like I'm imagining, being on the field, and I'm imagining all that, which is like, I mean, it's devastating. So and then I'm seeing people who have been devastated by it, and it's just this sort of really sort of poignant moment. And so the last thing that I want to do is just be standing up there crying in front of people. Yeah. So then it's like I've got to play that way, but then I also got to stop it, try and stop the expression of it myself, even though sometimes, I've had like, like a couple of tears,
Yeah.
But I'm just like, if I just don't wipe it away, no one will notice. I'm further, So yeah, like, yeah, I mean, that's happened a few times, like even in like I was playing in a summer camp band, and we were playing Daddy Boy, and the conductor had told the story about what it's about, about a mother thinking that they're not going to see their son again. And so he told the story, and then we're playing, and these kids are like, I don't know, between 10 and 14 or something. And I heard this, there was this young boy next to me, I heard this sniff. Oh, I was like, oh, should have blown his nose, like that sort of immediately, like, and then I look and he's just crying, because it was so beautiful. The low brass were behind us, and, they were sort of brought in for the concert, so we didn't have them in rehearsal, and they sounded so glorious. And then so he's crying, and then I see him crying, and then I start crying, and then the conductor's looking at me, and then sees the student, and then he starts tearing up, and we're like we're just like really messy, but cool, like what it is to be human,
Yeah. You think that's the reason music exists, or the purpose of?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's to connect people with their emotions. It's yeah, a language, well, with or without words, you know, but it just tends to cut to the heart of it quite effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'd love to know a little bit more about, you were saying you studied engineering, so you were set up to be somebody behind the scenes.
Totally.
How did you then end up being one of the, I mean, you're working all the time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
High demand performers.
Yeah, that was a surprise. A big surprise. I mean, the thing is, I mean, like I love all types of music. You know, and when I was a teenager, I was like a massive fan of rock and metal. That's all I listened to. I didn't really know any jazz. I played, you know, for a couple of years in the high school big band, but then that sort of, you know, ended, and but I never listened to it outside of that, you know, like I'd never heard any jazz records. It was all about, you know, it was like 90s rock and grunge and you know, industrial and goth, and you know, I was just like totally into it. So I thought, you know, and I always played music and played piano as well, and so I knew I wanted to do something to do with music, but you know, I'd never heard a trumpet. You know, there's no trumpet in Nirvana, you know, so it's like I didn't hear, like I couldn't imagine myself being a part of it on stage, but I wanted to be involved. So that's why I wanted to be a producer. Like I wanted to produce rock records. That was sort of what I decided that I wanted to do. And so at that time, and this is the 90s, like there was only one degree program in Australia that had a major in sound engineering. So it was this little, I call it a little hippie town, like this very, very unusual, very cool.
Where was that?
Little town. So it's in Australia. It's like, there's a place called Byron Bay, which is quite popular with like sort of celebrity, you know, actors and whatnot. And about 40 minutes away inland is this little town. And so it was basically like, you know, I wore like long dresses and had a nose ring and didn't wear shoes for 2 years, like just turned up, you know, everyone had bare feet, and it was just very sort of free and just sort of, you know, sort of alternative living. You know, I guess you could say I had a roommate that lived part-time in a teepee, you know, so that sort of vibe. So it was,
they had an engineering school.
Yeah, they had yes, they had they had a contemporary music program. So not so much jazz, although some people did some jazz related stuff, but it was mainly pop and rock. And there's no trumpet. There was no trumpet major or anything. I think there was saxophone. But I just went up there and I was studying music industry studies, and multimedia was sort of, you know, becoming a thing. And so I was just sort of, you know, doing that and running lights and sound and stuff. And that was sort of, you know, what that was cool. I was just trying to learn as much as possible. But I saw this ad up for one of the vocalists that wanted a trumpet player for her recital. And I'd been up there for 6 months and I hadn't really talked to anybody. I was quite shy. So I'm like, oh, that's a good way to meet people, I suppose. So I got my trumpet sent up. Like I didn't, so, you know, I hadn't played it for a while. But I ended up like playing on this recital. And then like within the next 18 months, I played on 45 recitals. And then I joined this funk band, and that's how I ended up supporting myself. So I was supporting myself through playing music, but in my mind, I was an engineer. So it was very strange. And so then I moved back to Sydney, and I didn't play trumpet for a couple of years. And I was working I was distributing radio commercials. That's as close as I could get. Like I was trying so hard to get any type of work, and no one would hire me. And I was even doing like an internship at this studio but like they stuck me in the office, and I'm just like, I just like finding it really difficult. Like, I know I've got skills, like I just can't seem to like get through. And so I worked at this company for about 18 months, and then the main producer was leaving, and so you know, as the assistant producer, you would think that I would be promoted, but actually I was brought into the office and they said, oh, actually the you know, the board doesn't think that a woman can run the studio, so we're firing you and we're going to replace you with a man. That was, wow. So I was just like, oh, right.
Maybe this is the problem.
It did not occur to me. I you know, I was raised in a house of like, there was 5 very strong-willed, very feisty women, you know. You know, so it's like,
wow.
It just never occurred to me that life could be like that, like just so stupid.
Right.
Yeah. So I went to my friend's place for coffee and cake. I'm like, I just got fired for being a woman. And I said, what am I going to do? And she goes, well, why don't you move to Melbourne and study improv? I'm like, that's a great idea. I'll move in a month. And that's how I decided. So I packed up my car and I moved to Melbourne like 8 months before the audition, and just auditioned at this one school and got in.
On the trumpet.
On the trumpet, yeah. So it's like I hadn't played it in a couple of years, and so I just played along to Kind of Blue and Time Out, Dave Brubeck. They were the only 2 jazz albums that I had. And so then that's how I started. That was year 1. And
wait, but how did your friend know? Or how?
I mean, she knew that I played trumpet because we studied together, you know, up in this little hippie town. And I don't know, it was just
random.
I mean, I never would have thought of it. I never,
right.
You know, like I just never. But it was just basically like, well, if there's no security in anything, I may as well go play some music. That's fun.
Some jazz.
Yeah.
There's no security in that either.
You know, like I just remember like being picked up for a rehearsal, like after, you know, and you know, and it was like this panel van, which is like they open up the back, and there was just this mattress with like 8 musicians sitting on it, you know. And I had my trumpet case, and I hand it to them, and I sort of climb in, and you know, and they hand me a drink, and then we got off into the hills, and then we rehearse and stuff, and it's all beautiful and fun, and people are great, and then they dropped me off at the end, and I just remember standing with my trumpet case. I was just like, that was really awesome, you know. So it's just like when she said, oh, you could study improv, I thought, oh, maybe I could do sort of, maybe that would make me a really good funk trumpet player, you know, or something. Maybe I would get some more gigs playing funk music or something, you know. Like I didn't, yeah, I don't know. That's sort of all I thought. But it was also like, I've got to do something because this is not going to work. So, you know, I can play the trumpet a bit, and so why don't I just do that, you know? And so, yeah, so that was like year 1. So I was running behind the bus for years, for the first couple of years. And I asked a teacher, how can I catch up to everyone? How can I learn all this stuff really quickly? And he said, transcribe. So I'm like, okay. So I went to the library, because I didn't understand that he meant like transcribe like on your instrument. I just thought, okay. And so I said, yeah. So I just picked I didn't know who anyone was. So I just picked up random CDs and then just would put it on and then just try and write it down and just sort of, you know, worked out. So it was like really great ear training. I think the first time I did it, I spent like an hour writing out 4 bars, and it was Miles, and I think he played like 5 notes, and I'm just like, you know, just rhythmically, I'm like, where does this go? You know, so, you know, I just worked really, really hard. And then it's just interesting that I went from that's U1. 4 years later, I'm doing masters at Manhattan School of Music. So it was this sort of meteoric
launched into
you know,
a
but
different universe.
Yeah, it really was. So it's like, you know, all of that long story to say, like, yeah, it was never part of the original plan, not in the slightest. I had no interest in being a trumpet player. So, you know, but you know, you got to pay the rent somehow.
And then you landed in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like it? I mean, how was that experience?
It was really difficult because it just sort of everything just felt really different. I mean, I was obviously at the school, you know, I was still, you know, I'd landed right back where I sort of started in. I just felt like I was just flailing and way, you know, just running behind the bus again. You know, I'm just like, everyone is so good and I have no idea what is going on. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of sort of, you know, financial stress, and you know, I was working at the school because of my visa. I was only allowed to work at the school, so I was working, you know, 20 hours a week, which was the max that I could do, you know, earning like $10 an hour and then trying to live off that, you know. So that was really stressful. And then just all the work, you know, I got like 4 hours of sleep a night, I think, for like 2 years. So it was a lot, you know, but it was really challenging. I met some amazing people who are still very dear friends of mine today. And yeah, and then I was just like, I don't know if this is for me, you know. I needed a break. I was fried, you know, after like 6 years of really intensive study. And I'm like, I also just need some money. I'm sick of eating porridge, you know, and like rice and beans and stuff, and living in cockroach infested apartments. Like, I'm just like, I just want to just up my standard of living a little bit. So yeah, so I ended up working in the distance learning department at MSM as a program coordinator. So I just did admin back in the office. She goes. And yeah.
No playing, or you did?
I wasn't playing. The only time I started playing a little bit more regularly with the Diva Jazz Orchestra. So that was the, you know, it was funny when I think back now. I'm like, it was the women that caught me. It was yes, the Sherry Miracle and the Diva Jazz Orchestra. I played with them for 10 years, and there was also a club date band run by Kip McClure, who you know, she ran like 5 sort of club date bands of women in the 80s, you know, and then over the years like had become you know, she transcribed and performed music from the International Sweethearts of Rhythm. So we would play their repertoire, you know, and I was sort of clueless I'd never heard of them, you know. So it's like I was just sort of just playing because I wanted to play and I wanted to pay my rent. And so those were the sort of the 2 bands that I worked with. Like, no one else was calling me for anything, like, until 2007. So I'd been in the States 4 years, you know, and then it was Darcy James Argue said, do you want to play a rehearsal with Secret Society? And in my mind, I'm like, this is my big break, a rehearsal, you know, because it was like, if I'm validated by a man, then that gives me credibility. And I knew it was wrong. I knew it was messed up, but I knew that was how the world was at that time. So yeah, and that's just sort of exactly what happened. So it's funny that now a lot of my work is in big bands. Like, you know, but that's because of the training that I had in high school. I guess it would have been like a middle school. We don't have middle school in Australia, but it's grades 7 to 12. But grades 7 through 9, I had this really amazing trumpet teacher and band conductor who taught me how to play in ensembles. He was like astounding, and still is an astoundingly good teacher. So all my ensemble skills I learned when I was between the age of 12 and 14. So I had that in my little stack of stuff I could do, and just ended up, you know, using it in all these large ensembles. And so then now I'm like, oh yeah, I play in a lot of large ensembles. It wasn't like I love big bands and it's my dream, you know, to.
It just happened.
I'm just like, I just need to survive.
But basically you got a call for this rehearsal, and that got you out of your office job finally.
That was I had quit my office job because I was like, Diva was actually performing quite a lot at that time, and we did quite a few tours. And so with that combined with like this tiny little bit of teaching that I had, I'm like, I can get by. So I did that. But then as soon as I started playing with Darcy, then other people started calling me for things, and I started playing with different ensembles. But other than that, it was like women only groups. So I'm like, oh, interesting. And it's funny because that's obviously very much pre Me Too movement of 2017. And you know, it's like now I have, you know, I see the current generation in schools, and there is definitely more representation, which is fantastic, you know. And I definitely am a mentor to many, you know, of the young students. And now playing in an all women group it's almost like a badge of honor. Whereas before it wasn't seen like that at all. It was the opposite of that. Right. So it's really interesting to see how things have changed and evolved, you know, in the last 20, it's not even the last 20 years, I would say since 2017. Huge changes. I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime, not at all, you know. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little more about the stereotypes and the biases, and how do you particularly challenge them or overcome them, and what needs to be changed, right? Because some people think, oh, it's pretty, you know, women can work, and right. So there's different agreements on, or opinions on what's actually the situation. And
right. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. Like, you know, if we line up, you know, 10 women or non-binary musicians, we have 10 different careers, right? You know, so just sort of speaking from my own experience, I think the biggest challenge, well, I guess I feel like if I walk into a room and I'm holding my trumpet case, the assumption is generally it's never going to be she's really great at what she does. That's the assumption. I know that I need to prove myself before I'm taken seriously or validated or whatever it is, right? So yeah, so that's why even like when I do residencies and I walk in, you know, and I can see the look of sort of curiosity on some students' faces, but I just make sure that I play something pretty early on, usually sort of high or loud or something, you know, like it's just like, you know, in order for them to be like, oh, okay. You know, it's like that immediate, like I have to, you know, and I mean, in an ideal world, I wouldn't have to do that. You know, in an ideal world, I would walk into a room and people would think that I could play, rather than am I lost, which I have had that before. Said that, you know, when I'm walked into a rehearsal at the Union, you lost. I'm like, no, I'm carrying a trumpet, like I'm here for a rehearsal, you know. So I have that, or like, you know, or, you know, they think I'm someone's girlfriend or whatever, you know. So it's like that assumption and those sort of like immediate
you don't
sort of,
belong.
yeah, totally, you know. And it's, you know, there's I work with the Women in Jazz organization, and they've got this really great mentorship program. And one of my mentees, Belle Thompson, wrote this incredible paper on why like young women don't pursue jazz and don't pursue music after being in their high school big band, you know. And essentially it's really great reading, and it won an award at Temple University, you know. But essentially it sort of boils down to that feeling of otherness, you know. And I think that otherness is key, you know. And it's I mean, it's still apparent, like I play in ensembles and I'm like the only woman on stage, and so then, you know, it's like I barely notice it because I'm there to do my job and to do my job well. But then you speak to the audience, and then it's like, I know 99% of the time I'm going to have to talk about being a woman, you know. It's like, you know, and it's just like, oh, so much of my life has spent talking about this, you know. And I'm like, obviously it's very much a part of my identity, but there are other things that I like to talk about too, you know. So it's like, but it's just like, if I look at my position in the history of women in this field, it's like I have it so much better than the generation before me, you know. And you know, my teacher Laurie and the generations before that, or the international sweethearts of rhythm, and then even further back, like there's so many women, you know. I've got books of you know, I've got like a discography of women jazz players from like 1920 to 1960 or something. It's an entire book, and I'm like, I've never heard of them, and it just makes me so cranky that I've done all this education and yet never heard of any of them. So it's like people go, oh, it's so great to see women sort of starting to play jazz or whatever, and it's just like, we've been here all along. We've literally been here since the beginning. We are half the population, you know. And it's like, even in like, you know, in New York in the 40s, you know, during the war, there was 800 women instrumentalists registered in the local 802 union. 800 jazz players, women, you know. So it's just like, you know, and obviously all their union cards were revoked, you know, when the war was over, and they went back to the kitchen, you know. But it's just like, oh, it's just so, it just makes me furious, you know. So that's why I do the work that I do. I've got to channel all that inner fury into something, you know, something helpful. Yeah, that's what I try and do, at least.
Yeah, so you're involved in the Women in Music,
yeah, and I just sort of
as mentors and
totally, yeah, I do that a lot. And yeah, and do residencies, and like I just find it, honestly, like just walking into a room in a university in the middle of, you know, not in a major city, and you know, there'll be a class of, you know, like 99%, you know, young men.
Yeah.
And then you just see like the one or two people, and their eyes like light up, because they're like, they've never seen a professional woman or non-binary, you know, performer. And immediately I'm just like, my job is done. Like literally just walking into the room,
Yeah.
It's like, that's all I needed to do to validate, you know, that, that it's just like, yes, we exist and it's possible.
Right.
And it's almost like, okay, good luck. See you later, you know, be in touch if you need anything, and I'm going to go. You know, so it's like, and that's the thing about social media, is that like it connects. And I think that's partly why we're seeing sort of like such a, you know, like certainly a more diverse, population, like in the music and in the schools, is because through social media they've been able to support each other. So I think that's one perk of it, at least.
Yeah. People have been asking me, wow, 100 female musicians? That's a lot. How did you find them? And I was like, well, I know even more people that I also want. You know, it's endless.
Yeah. I mean, I listed on my website, maybe like, I mean, it's over 200 instrumentalists.
Yeah, I checked that list out. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, it just like, it was just like, just off the top of my head, like, who have I played music with? Because there is such a vibrant scene of players, but it's just like, that's just not the scene that you usually see in downbeat, you know. Like, you know, according to downbeat, there's only like, you know, there's 3 or 4 extraordinary women, and that's it, you know. So it's just I just thought it was important to have that out there. And then like a list of like, okay, and also like, because people are just like looking for information. Sorry about the siren, but it is New York. If people are looking for information like, oh, I want to incorporate more, you know, repertoire from you know, BIPOC population, like, where do I go? And I'm like, well, like,
got a list.
Here's the list. Like, it's just like lists of resources, you know. It's just, you know, as much as I can.
It's visibility, right?
Yeah, and it's I mean, there are amazing people out there doing really amazing things. It's just really hard to know about everybody. So just my little effort, which is very small, you know, is just like, just trying to at least spread the word of, like, you know, initiatives. There's a great one called Diversify the Stand, you know, and so it's, you know, all music by women and non-binary composers, you know, and it's just like, cool, like, that's really awesome, because you look at the, you know, the syllabus and all these things, and it's just like, like old white dude, you know. It's like, let's just mix this up a little bit, you know. So it just makes everything so much more vibrant, and you know, and how amazing to have, you know, yourself reflected in the music that you study. That's the aim.
Right. What advice would you give aspiring women musicians who just start out their musical career? If you want one tip or
one tip. Oh my gosh. Stand your ground. Do what you want. And then find people that also are doing what they want, that could be close to what you want to do. And become friends. You know, like, you're going to need support, so find your people, you know.
Great. I'd love to hear a little bit more, because you told me you're doing research, you're back to studies. Tell me about that.
So I studied with a great Laurie Frank when I was doing my master's at Manhattan School of Music, and she was just such an incredible teacher, and she studied with the great Carmine Caruso, who was like, you know, like the brass teacher in New York in the 80s, and so everyone used to study with with him. And then after he passed, then everyone used to go study with Laurie. And so after her passing in 2013, I seem to have sort of become involved in initiatives to, you know, sort of keep her legacy alive, I guess. So I helped to form the Laurie Frink Career Grant, which awards $10,000 to a brass player 25 years and under that's based in the US. So every 2 years, you know, we give out the money. So there's that has been going now for 10 years. And also the Laurie Frink Brass Summit, which is like a meeting of brass players to talk about, you know, top secret trumpet business. That hasn't run since the pandemic. I got to get onto that at some point. But anyway, I just sort of, you know, there's a whole lot of sort of little scattered pieces of information and also misinformation about the way that both Caruso and Laurie taught. And so again, it was just sort of one of these, you know, just sort of the universe guiding me in a particular direction. Anyway, so my PhD is on their pedagogy. So I'm trying to document their contributions and then just sort of like clear up, you know, sort of any questions that people have. You know, some people, you know, do some of the exercises that in a way that's not as effective. But I also want to talk about how they taught. Like usually in all the, you know, some dissertations and stuff, everyone's so focused on the exercises. But I'm like, being a great teacher isn't about the exercises. There's something much bigger and much more important that no one's talking about. So that's what I want to do. So that's sort of step one of a larger multi-tiered project that I'm putting together that I will reveal over time. So yeah, so it's exciting. It's the most important thing that I'm doing. But yeah, it's yeah, hopefully at least the dissertation will be done in the next couple of years, and then other things will happen after that.
How did working with her influence your teaching? Because you're I mean, last year you were at Berklee, but you got too busy traveling and doing all the other stuff that now you're doing privates a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Scattered throughout.
Yeah, I teach privately.
What's your style, or how did working with all your different teachers?
I mean, with her, it's sort of approaching things through a problem-solving lens. So when a student, you know, walks into the room, I'm trying to work out exactly what they need for the next week. You know, and it's not so much like an exercise, like it could be like, and it could be like sort of building on exercises that I've done in previous weeks, and you know, that you know, I'm systematic in that way. Like she would always, you know, in the lessons, she would have like a piece of music paper and she just writes down the exercises and then hands it to you, and then off you go and you do the exercises, and then you come back and, you know, and you build upon that, and miracle of miracles, you get better. So I've tried to incorporate that same sort of systematic approach in my own lessons. But often at times is like, you know, students might just need someone to listen to them. You know, I mean, I know most of the time I talked for like 55 minutes of my lesson, you know, and that was like so incredibly helpful. It was like a therapy session, you know, and I know a lot of people have said that about lessons, that it was more like therapy than, you know, but I mean, that affects your music so deeply.
Right.
So yeah, so that's sort of, you know, I do use, she and John McNeil wrote this great book called Flexus. And so I use a lot of exercises out of that book. And then I also use the systems that she used in my lessons, you know, but then I also incorporate other things that she never talked about as well. So it's not as if I'm trying to mimic exactly what she's doing. I'm trying to learn all about that. And then also incorporate things that I've discovered over my many, many, many years of teaching, and especially teaching beginners, you know, like just trying to make the instrument easier to play.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. How do you keep the balance between staying true to your, you know, music and meeting commercial expectations? I mean, I love reading your newsletter. It's always very fun, and I think you do a great job with the business thing of our.
Yeah.
But how do you balance, or what's?
I don't think I do, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like there's just so many different elements to it. There's so many different hats to wear that it's impossible to wear every hat equally well, you know. So I think what I try and do is I think about things in terms of waves. So in certain times I'm going to have a wave of, you know, more sort of, you know, like if I'm making a record or something, and that's going to be my focus, you know, and then I'll still try and maintain, like, you know, I've been doing this monthly newsletter for 11 years now. So it's like that to me is like my constant. And I remember speaking to a publicist and they just said, just do one thing really well, which I think was good advice. So it's just like, you know, whether it be like Instagram or, you know, TikTok or whatever, like, so I'm just like, I'm just going to do my newsletter. And so that's just sort of been the constant. So, you know, that to me sort of takes care of a certain level of business. And I do try and post regularly on social media. You know, but in terms of everything else, like I just, you know, I have all these different projects that I'm doing. And so, and I'm a very sort of visual person. I need to be able to see it. So I can't use Google Calendar, because if I'm like, oh, there's nothing there, I've got the day off, you know, like, so it's like, so I've got to see everything. So I've got to plan out my week, and I plan out all these things that I've got to do. And so it's almost like I do a big brain dump of all the different things that I've got to do, you know, and then you just put them in big categories. And then every day I just try and like assign certain things to the day. So it's just like these little by little, you know, but the hardest part is like going from one thing to another and like expecting my brain to be cool with that, you know, making that switch. So it's just like, sometimes it's like wrangling a 3-year-old. Like, I'm like, I don't want to go do this. I don't want to do my homework, you know? So then I'll do all these other things that I need to do. And a friend of mine termed that procrastination, which I thought was quite cool. So I'm doing other things that do need to be done. But just at least I'm doing something sort of productive, but not what I'm supposed to be doing. But yeah, I mean, like it's always going to be a work in progress. And, you know, I read the books on time management and organization and atomic habits and, you know, all those sorts of things, and just really try and stay as organized as I can. And I also just try and keep sort of my personal spaces as sort of clear of chaos as I can, you know, just so my brain has a fighting chance of getting some stuff done. So that's sort of how I do it. But I don't think balance is really my specialty. I think it's more like just sort of getting what needs to be done, you know. So I do try and stick to deadlines, and I'm usually really punctual. Like, you know, I hate being late. So yeah, so that's what I try and do. So if it means like having to sort of, you know, get through things really quickly in order to make a deadline, then I'm like, well, that's it, that's done, you know. Like, So yeah, it's sort of, I guess, letting go of that sort of perfectionism and be like, okay, this isn't going to be like the best thing I've ever written in my life, but this is what is happening. So that's
And
that,
then
you know.
it's as a musician, I feel like we are able to work all the time because we don't have weekends or dedicated office hours. And how do you manage that? Do you have hobbies or conscious mental notes that you need to go to nature, or what do you do?
Yeah, you know, I often think, like, I could think, what do civilians do? That's what I call non-musicians. What do civilians do? Like, you know, on the weekend when they don't have a gig or teaching lessons or whatever. And so
Yes.
over the years, I've tried to keep my teaching to weekdays, to sort of free up the weekends a little bit. And so the weekends are generally, you know, if I have, you know, a gig or something. At the moment, it's writing, you know, like it's hard when you're writing music and you have a deadline. It's hard not to be like, okay, I'll just spend all weekend working on that, and I'm teaching all the way, you know, during the week and working on the PhD, and then I'm doing, you know, writing, you know,
And the concerts in the night.
and the concert. Yeah, so it is, you know, it's a lot. Like, well, and so I've got to just force myself to take a day off. For example, yesterday I didn't do anything, so that was my that was my treat. I'm like, I'm gonna not check my email. I'm only gonna check it like 4 times a day, you know, instead of, like, you know, every 10 minutes. You know, which is not helpful anyway. Yeah, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not gonna write. I'm not gonna do all these things. I'll do them all on their scheduled times. You know, I try and get up early, and then I try and end my day, if I'm not teaching, you know, usually, like, if I'm not teaching, I'll try and end my sort of business day at 5 o'clock. And if I'm teaching, it's usually like 8 o'clock or something, you know. So I try and give myself the evening to just chill, you know. So yeah, so I do try and read, or I try and knit, or, you know, listen to podcasts, or, you know, leave the apartment, or, you know, catch up with people, or do something. But, you know, yeah, I've yeah, it's hard to do, because, you know, I would have put something off until I'm like, I have to do it. Now I don't have time to take time off, you know. So just sort of battling with that instinct. This,
right.
You know, yeah, it's a little tricky.
Well, that sounds very, very familiar.
Yeah, totally.
Well, also, I mean, all the stuff we do is fun.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and
it can be.
I mean, yeah, maybe not like answering emails, but it's generally all the stuff. It's, you know, it's what we choose to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny, like, people go, oh, do you go to gigs? And I don't generally, you know, which is a shame. But at the same time, it's just like, I spend all day, every day, working on music, and so relaxing wouldn't be going to hear more music, you know, because my brain is going to be working, like, what's going on, analyzing things, you know. It's hard not to, it's hard to shut off that. I can't shut off that sort of analytical side of things. So I mean, I do occasionally, you know, but just, you know, I just feel like when I've just got these big projects to do, I'm not going to, you know, be going to gigs, or, you know, going out to movies, or whatever, that often. Like, it's scheduled in, you know, which is so you know, well, that's what it is, and that's what needs to happen right now, you know. So
Great. I love to conclude with, are there any upcoming projects or things that you're excited about? What's happening? Where do you see yourself going?
Well, I've always got like an album in the works. So, I've had this one sort of lying dormant since 2020. So some other albums are sort of stuck in since then. So I need to go back and finish that. I'm excited about my research. Like, that's really interesting and it's so important, and I understand the gravity of it. So that's, that's something that I'm excited about. Yeah. I think that's it. And then just like, getting to play with these cool groups that I play with. Next year looks pretty busy. So yeah, quite a bit of touring, which is cool. And then just trying to balance that with teaching, and then some other, I've got like another commission to do after this one. And so yeah, it's a lot. It's just basically just like, what is it, spitting plates on sticks. Right. So, but all things that I want to do, so I can't complain.
Beautiful. Well, people can check out your website. I'll put it in the description, and your socials, and they should all register for your newsletter. I think it's a great one. I always get very happy. It's always good vibes in your newsletter. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And thank you for being on my project and on the podcast.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you so much.
And we'll stay in touch.
Sounds like a plan.
As I conclude this episode of ViviTalks, I want to express my sincere gratitude for joining me in this musical journey. I hope you enjoyed exploring the stories and experiences of the incredible female musicians on my album. To stay updated on our latest episodes, subscribe to ViviTalks on your favorite podcast platform. Connect with me on social media through ViviTalks, and please check out my album Type of Thing, a musical exchange featuring 100 female musicians to empower female cacao farmers of Virunga State Park in Congo. It's about more than just music. It's about making a positive impact in the world. Your support is part of that journey, so thank you once again for tuning in. Until next time, keep celebrating the power of music, and let's continue to amplify the voices of remarkable women in the industry. Stay inspired, stay empowered, and keep the music flowing. With love and gratitude. Till soon.